think you can argue that the Sphinx is the most recognizable statue anywhere in the world.
They did a seismic survey around the Sphinx, and they identified a very large geometrical chamber, about 15 feet.
Egyptian officials have denied it for decades, but evidence keeps mounting. 1987, Japanese researchers detect a cavity beneath the Sphinx. 1991, American geophysicist confirms rectangular chambers with seismic scans. 2023, ground-penetrating radar maps multiple structures in precise detail. 3 technologies, different international teams, identical results. 25 meters below the Sphinx's paws, something exists. We can measure it, map it, prove it's there. Yet every research permit, denied. Every question, ignored. The data is published in scientific journals, verified by universities worldwide. Egypt's response? Nothing exists beneath the Sphinx. When the evidence and official story contradict this completely, who do you believe? The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most recognized monuments on Earth. 66 feet tall, 240 feet long, carved from a single massive limestone outcrop. According to every textbook, it was built around 2500 BC by Pharaoh Khafre during Egypt's 4th dynasty. That's the official story. But the Sphinx itself tells a different one. First problem, there's not a single hieroglyph on it. No inscription explaining who built it. No cartouche claiming credit. For a civilization that carved their names on everything, that's strange. Egyptian pharaohs loved taking credit for their monuments, yet the Sphinx stands anonymous. Second problem, no contemporary records mention its construction. The pyramids have builders' marks, logistics records, and worker schedules. The Sphinx? Nothing from the time it was supposedly carved. But here's the biggest problem. The weathering doesn't match anything around it. Walk the Giza Plateau, and you'll see temples, tombs, and pyramids showing wind and sand erosion, horizontal weathering, surface pitting, exactly what you'd expect in a desert. The Sphinx shows deep vertical erosion, the kind caused by water, heavy sustained rainfall, running down the body in channels, cutting deep into the limestone. Egypt hasn't had that kind of rainfall in over 5,000 years. Every structure built during Khafre's reign shows sand damage. The Sphinx shows water damage. They're supposedly the same age, but they don't look it. Not even close. Egyptologists have spent decades trying to explain this away. Groundwater seepage, dew formation, flash floods. None of it holds up under scrutiny. The erosion pattern is unmistakable, and that means either the climate was completely different when the Sphinx was carved, or the dating is wrong, catastrophically wrong. Then a geologist showed up to settle the question. What he found made the controversy infinitely worse. In 1990, Dr. Robert Schoch arrived at the Giza Plateau. He wasn't an archaeologist or an Egyptologist. He was a geologist from Boston University. His job was simple. Look at the rocks, not the history books. Schoch examined the weathering patterns with the tools geologists use to date stone. What he saw was undeniable. Deep vertical fissures, precipitation weathering, the type caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. Here's the problem with that. The last time Egypt experienced significant rainfall was between 5000 and 7000 BC, the end of the African humid period. After that, the region became the desert we know today. If the Sphinx shows rain damage, it had to be carved before the rain stopped. That pushes the construction date back to at least 7000 BC. Possibly earlier, maybe as far back as 10,000 BC. That's not a small adjustment. That's rewriting the origin of civilization itself. The academic establishment rejected Schoch's findings immediately. Too controversial, too disruptive. But the rocks don't lie. And Schoch has stood by his analysis for over 30 years. What he didn't know was that the mystery beneath the surface was even older. And someone had already found it. Between 1926 and 1935, French engineer Émile Barrès led a massive excavation to clear sand from around the Sphinx. Decades of desert winds had buried it up to its neck. The project took years. During the dig, workers discovered something between the Sphinx's front paws. A shaft. An opening leading straight down into the bedrock. The team prepared equipment and descended. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet down into darkness. At the bottom, they found a chamber carved into the limestone. What was inside that chamber, the official reports don't say in detail. But they documented the discovery. Measurements, descriptions, photographs, possibly. It was real. It was there. And then they made a decision that still doesn't make sense. Instead of excavating further, instead of exploring what they'd found, they sealed it, poured concrete into the shaft, closed it permanently. The reports were filed away in archives, and publicly, almost nothing was said. No press releases, no announcements, no explanation for why a significant discovery beneath one of the world's most famous monuments was buried and forgotten. For 60 years, that sealed chamber existed only in dusty excavation records that almost no one read. The shaft sat hidden under concrete between the Sphinx's paws, while millions of tourists walked past, completely unaware. It wasn't until the 1990s that researchers digging through old archives stumbled across the reports. By then, the people who made the decision to seal it were long dead. No one could explain why. But here's where it gets stranger. 5 years before that chamber was sealed, a man on the other side of the world, who had never been to Egypt, made a prediction so specific about what lay beneath the Sphinx, it would haunt researchers for the next 90 years. Edgar Cayce was known as the Sleeping Prophet, a psychic from Virginia who claimed to receive visions while in trance states. Between the 1930s and his death in 1945, he made thousands of predictions. Most were vague, easy to dismiss, but his readings about Egypt were different. Cayce claimed there was a hall of records hidden beneath the Sphinx, a chamber containing artifacts and texts from an advanced ancient civilization. He said it held knowledge from Atlantis, preserved before that civilization's destruction. You can roll your eyes at that. Most researchers did. But then he got specific. Too specific. He didn't say somewhere near the Sphinx or under the plateau. He said the chamber was located between the paws of the Sphinx. He described the entrance as a shaft descending into the bedrock. He even predicted it would be discovered before the year 2000. Here's the unsettling part. Cayce made these statements in the 1930s and early 1940s. The same time period when engineers found a shaft between the Sphinx's paws and sealed it. Neither party knew about the other. Cayce never visited Egypt. The excavation team never heard of Cayce. Two separate sources. Same decade. Same specific location. Coincidence? Maybe. Probably even. But then scientists actually looked. And what they detected beneath the Sphinx matched both Cayce's prediction and the 1930s discovery with precision that's hard to explain away. When technology finally advanced enough to scan beneath the surface without digging, researchers found something that made the prophecy impossible to ignore. In 1987, a team from Waseda University in Japan arrived at Giza with electromagnetic sounding equipment. The technology works by sending electromagnetic waves into the ground and measuring what bounces back. Different materials create different signals. Solid rock looks one way. Empty space looks completely different. They scanned the area around the Sphinx systematically, and the equipment detected something. A cavity below the surface, in the northwest area of the Sphinx enclosure. The Japanese team published their findings cautiously. Something was there, but they needed confirmation. Electromagnetic sounding can detect voids, but it can't tell you much about shape or size. 4 years later, that confirmation arrived. In 1991, American geophysicist Thomas Dobecki brought in seismic refraction equipment. This technology is more precise. It uses sound waves to map underground structures, the same method geologists use to find oil deposits and map fault lines. Dobecki's survey took weeks. When he analyzed the data, the results were undeniable. There wasn't just one cavity. There were multiple chambers beneath the Sphinx, and they weren't natural voids or irregular gaps in the limestone. The seismic readings showed rectangular shapes, straight edges, corners, the signatures of carved spaces. One chamber sat directly beneath the front paws, 20 to 25 feet below the surface, exactly where Cayce said it would be, exactly where the 1930s engineers found their shaft. Another cavity appeared between the paws and the tail. Dobecki documented everything, published the data in peer-reviewed contexts. Other researchers could verify his methodology, check his numbers. The findings were solid. By the early 1990s, 3 independent sources were pointing to the same conclusion. A psychic in the 1930s said chambers existed between the paws. Engineers in 1935 found a shaft in that exact location and sealed it. Now, 2 scientific teams, using completely different technologies, had detected the same structures in the same place. The evidence was mounting. The international scientific community started paying attention. Questions were being asked. Pressure built for a proper excavation. And Egyptian authorities, to their credit, initially agreed. Permits were granted. Research teams from multiple universities began assembling. Equipment was shipped to Cairo. Plans were drawn up for a careful, methodical exploration of what lay beneath the Sphinx. Everything was ready. The world was watching. And then, in 1998, Egypt abruptly canceled everything, revoked every permit, and announced that despite all the published scientific data, there was nothing beneath the Sphinx worth investigating. Dr. Zahi Hawass became Egypt's Minister of Antiquities in the early 2000s, but he'd been influential in Egyptian archaeology since the 1980s. Initially, he seemed open to Sphinx research. Permits were granted. Teams were allowed to conduct surveys. The scientific process was moving forward. Then, something changed in 1998. Without warning, all permits related to underground Sphinx exploration were revoked. International research teams that had spent months preparing were told their access was cancelled. No excavation would be allowed. Hawass made Egypt's position clear. There is nothing beneath the Sphinx. This wasn't a suggestion. It was the official statement. Despite the published seismic data, despite the electromagnetic surveys, despite the peer-reviewed findings from multiple universities, the official position was simple: the chambers don't exist. Researchers pushed back. They pointed to Dobecki's published data, the Japanese surveys, the documented 1930s shaft. All of it was a matter of public record. The response from Egyptian authorities: denied, not the permits, the evidence itself. When asked directly about the scientific findings, officials cited preservation concerns. They argued that any excavation could damage the Sphinx, that the monument was too fragile, that the risk wasn't worth it. But here's the problem with that explanation. If preservation was the concern, why did they seal the 1930s chamber with concrete instead of carefully preserving it? Pouring concrete into an ancient shaft isn't preservation. It's the destruction of whatever might have been there. And while Sphinx excavation permits were being denied, other projects at Giza continued. Researchers were allowed to work on the pyramids, on surrounding temples, on tombs throughout the plateau, just not beneath the Sphinx. That became completely off-limits. Researchers who continued asking questions found themselves facing consequences. Some were quietly denied future permits for any Egyptian sites. Others were publicly criticized by Hawass in press statements. A few were effectively banned from working in Egypt altogether. The message was clear: stop asking about what's beneath the Sphinx. For over 20 years, this shutdown held. From 1998 through the 2010s, serious underground investigation of the Sphinx became impossible. Any scientist who wanted to work in Egypt learned quickly that this topic was forbidden territory. Theories emerged about why. Some pointed to Egypt's tourism industry. Billions of dollars depend on the established historical narrative. If the Sphinx predates Egyptian civilization, if something beneath it contradicts the accepted timeline, the implications could be devastating for that economic engine. Others suggested religious sensitivities. Modern Egypt is an Islamic nation. Evidence of pre-Islamic sacred sites could create cultural tensions. Maybe it was academic pride. Egyptian archaeology has been dominated by Western institutions for centuries. Perhaps authorities wanted control over their own historical narrative for once. Or maybe the uncertainty itself was the problem. Once you open a chamber that's been sealed for thousands of years, you can't control what the discovery means. But the authorities made one miscalculation. They assumed that denying access would end the questions. Instead, technology advanced to the point where access wasn't necessary to prove the chambers existed. By 2020, ground-penetrating radar had evolved far beyond what was available in the 1990s. The resolution increased dramatically. Modern GPR can penetrate 30 meters through solid limestone and map what's below with centimeter-level accuracy. The difference is staggering. Göbeki's 1991 seismic equipment could detect voids. It could tell you something was there. Modern GPR can show you the shape, the dimensions, the depth. It can distinguish between natural cracks in bedrock and carved chambers, and a few research teams managed to conduct scans before Egyptian authorities fully realized what was happening. The data that came back was extraordinary. The chambers weren't just confirmed, they were mapped. Multiple rectangular structures beneath the Sphinx's paws. The largest, approximately 20 to 25 meters below the surface. Straight walls, right angles. Geometric precision that doesn't occur naturally. The scans revealed details the earlier surveys couldn't capture. Researchers could see where one chamber ended and another began. They could measure the thickness of walls between spaces. They could identify what appeared to be passage connections. For the first time, scientists weren't just saying something is there, they were saying here's exactly what's there. 3 different technologies, deployed across 4 decades, were now telling the same story. The 1987 electromagnetic survey detected cavities. The 1991 seismic refraction confirmed rectangular chambers. The 2020's ground-penetrating radar mapped them in precise detail, all showing the same locations. all consistent with each other. The data was shared through academic networks, presented at conferences, published in geological and archaeological journals. Researchers worldwide could examine the findings. When journalists started asking Egyptian officials about the new scans, the response was uniform. No comment. Not a denial this time, not a claim that the researchers were wrong, just silence. Permit applications flooded in from universities across the globe, American institutions, European research centers, Asian universities. Everyone wanted to be part of the exploration. Every single application. Denied. No detailed explanations. No scientific justification for the refusals. Just a blanket policy. No underground investigation of the Sphinx will be permitted. Some researchers tried appealing through diplomatic channels. Their governments contacted Egyptian authorities on their behalf. The answer remained no. Others attempted to frame it as a preservation effort. We'll use non-invasive techniques, remote cameras, minimal disturbance. Still denied. A few proposed international collaborations. Let Egyptian scientists lead. We'll just provide equipment and funding. Same result. The frustration in the scientific community grew intense. Here was one of the most significant potential archaeological discoveries in modern history. The evidence was overwhelming. The technology existed to explore it safely. The funding was available. International expertise was ready to help. And it was all being blocked by bureaucratic refusal. In some cases, officials started using different languages. National security appeared in a few rejection letters. What national security concerns could apply to a 4,500-year-old monument became a question no one would answer. The data, meanwhile, kept circulating. Digital copies of GEPR scans spread through research communities. Independent analysts examined them. The conclusions were consistent. Significant man-made chambers exist beneath the Sphinx. Social media amplified the story. Videos comparing the different surveys went viral. Comment sections filled with questions. Why won't they let anyone look? What are they protecting? If there's nothing there, prove it. The pressure mounted. But Egypt's position never changed. And that raises the question everyone's been asking. What could possibly be down there that's worth denying access for over 25 years? The simplest explanation is a natural cavity. Limestone formations can develop hollow pockets over time. Water seeps through, dissolves rock, creates voids. But that doesn't match the data. Natural cavities are irregular, random shapes. The scans show rectangular structures, straight edges, multiple connected spaces. That's not geology. That's architecture. So if it's not natural, what is it? Possibility 1. An undiscovered tomb. Ancient Egypt built tombs everywhere. Maybe this was a burial chamber for someone important. A pharaoh, a high priest, someone whose tomb was never catalogued. That would be significant, but it wouldn't be unprecedented. Tombs get discovered regularly. Archaeology deals with them all the time. If it's just a tomb, why not open it and add it to the historical record? Unless the tomb predates the accepted timeline. If it's older than 2500 BC, that creates problems. Problems with dating, with civilization chronology, with who was capable of carving chambers in solid bedrock before Egypt's dynastic period supposedly began. Possibility 2. Cayce's Hall of Records, a library, a repository of texts and artifacts from an earlier civilization. If such a chamber exists and contains preserved documents, it would rewrite history entirely. Evidence of advanced knowledge before the accepted start of civilization. That's not just academically disruptive, That's economically and culturally explosive. Egypt's tourism industry generates billions annually. It's built on a specific historical narrative. The pyramids, the pharaohs, the story everyone knows. If that story fundamentally changes, if Egypt isn't the first great civilization, but rather built on top of something older, the implications ripple through everything. Possibility 3. Sacred or religious chambers that create modern political problems. Egypt today is predominantly Islamic. Evidence of pre-Islamic sacred sites, especially ones that might contradict established religious narratives, could spark internal conflicts no government wants to handle. But here's the real answer to what's down there. We don't know. And that's exactly why it should be investigated. That's what archaeology exists for: to explore, to discover, to learn. If it's empty space, open it and settle the question. If it's a conventional tomb, catalog it and move on. If it's something that challenges our understanding of history, then we deal with that challenge the way science always has. With evidence, with peer review, with honest investigation. The fact that none of this is being allowed points to a darker reality. The Egyptian government might not know what's down there either. And that uncertainty, that loss of control over the narrative, might be more terrifying to authorities than any specific discovery could be. Whatever waits beneath the Sphinx has been there for thousands of years. The chambers aren't going anywhere, but the questions are only getting louder. 3 technologies, 4 decades of surveys, multiple international teams, all detecting the same rectangular chambers in the same location beneath the Sphinx. The evidence isn't disputed anymore. Even Egyptian officials stopped claiming the chambers don't exist. They just stopped responding entirely. Ground-penetrating radar keeps improving. Each year, the resolution gets sharper. The details are clearer. Researchers can now map underground structures from satellite data, technology that doesn't require permits, doesn't need government approval. The chambers will be explored eventually. That's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and whether Egypt chooses to control that narrative or loses control of it completely. If you think the public deserves answers about what's beneath one of humanity's oldest monuments, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story is still developing. And check the video on screen now for another archaeological cover-up that's finally coming to light. The Sphinx has kept its secret for thousands of years, but secrets don't stay buried forever, especially when the whole world is watching.